Good evening, I'm David Kramer with Alaska Weather. As always, please visit our website, weather.gov/Alaska, get any updates to our forecast, or check out any watches, warnings, or advisories that we might have out for your area. You can also call our weather info line, 1-800-472-0391, getting updates to the forecast through that means as well. And you can email me at the address at the bottom of the screen. We don't have any watches, warnings, or advisories out at present, so we will jump ahead to some outages we are expecting for that weather info line. So upcoming service outage, this is a scheduled outage for this Saturday, June 20th, that will begin at 7 a.m. Alaska time to 5 p.m. Alaska time. This is for the weather, or the Alaska weather info line, so we do expect some outages there. If you're going to call in, try to call in before 7 a.m. or after 5 p.m. There could be missing data on the line for those times of the day. Again, that's on Saturday, June 20th. Another area that's going to be hit by this scheduled outage is going to be the NOAA weather radio. Some of those stations will still work, but the ones that will have intermittent outages are going to be Barrow, Kotzebue, Nome, Bethel, St. Paul, Unalaska, Cold Bay, and Yakutat. The good news is the TV weather program will still be running just fine, and we also anticipate the weather.gov site for all your normal forecasts and updates and watches, warnings, advisories will be working just fine as well. So again, those upcoming service outages, we do have that for the NOAA weather info line and for several of the NOAA weather radio stations around the state. And that is on Saturday, June 20th between 7 a.m. and 5 p.m. Moving ahead to our fire danger for June 18th, we do have an area out by the Yukon Flats that is going to be in high area of danger. Also by the Fairbanks area, we are expecting high fire danger there, extending down towards the Delta Junction area as well. And then down by southwest Alaska by the Bristol Bay area between Dillingham and King Salmon, we do have an area of high danger down there as well. And then finally up further to the north by Kivalina, we do have an area of high danger extending into the lower elevations of the Brooks Range, that western portion of the Brooks Range. Moving into our satellite imagery, we'll start off with the low that's been hanging out by the Alaska Peninsula, expecting that to continue to be there, bringing more cloud cover and rain to the peninsula, to the eastern Aleutians, areas of Kodiak Island, and some locations in southwest Alaska as well. We can see out over the Panhandle area, we had a system pushing through that brought that heavy rain to the area, starting to diminish some of that rain amounts now, but we had areas around 3 inches of rain in the southern portions of the Panhandle and still seeing some rain lingering into these evening hours. And we can see behind this system we have a train of clouds that's coming up from the south, bringing more precipitation to the area, and another system that's going to be moving in from the North Pacific. And finally, we can watch this again and see some of the afternoon convection developing out over mainland part of the state, expecting more thunderstorms this afternoon and evening. We can already see that developing in this satellite imagery. And then if you look way out to the west, we have an upper level disturbance near the western Aleutians that's bringing some upper level clouds, but we can also see underneath that from high pressure around the area that we are seeing a lot of stratus underneath that upper level disturbance. Taking a look now at our weather for the remainder of today, we'll start out west by that high pressure where we do have areas of fog for the western Aleutians and central Aleutians that's extending up to cover much of the central and western portions of the Bering Sea, also up there by St. Matthew Island. Our low pressure out over the Alaska Peninsula continuing to spin relatively in place, but starting to get some little bit of easterly movement, still bringing a lot of rain to the Alaska Peninsula and Kodiak Island area, with showers on the backside coming in to the eastern Aleutian Islands. Some of those showers also making their way into southwestern portions of the state, into the Kuskokwim Delta, as well as other areas around Bristol Bay. Extending up further to the north into the western portions of the interior, we are expecting some thunderstorms to continue to develop this afternoon and evening hours for that western portion of the interior. And the potential for thunderstorms and showers is going to extend up into southern portions of the Brooks Range as well as eastern portions of the Brooks Range. Along the Arctic coastline, however, we have that 1020 millibar low out to the northwest that's extending, ridging out over the area, keeping that precipitation out over the Brooks Range. And as we drop down to the south central areas of the state, we do have widespread rain along the North Gulf Coast, with some of that rain extending into areas of the Mat-Su Valleys and also the Copper River Basin and Alaska Range. Then that rain is going to extend down the Gulf coastline all the way into the Panhandle area, where we are expecting to see continued rain as we have onshore flow coming off of those Gulf waters, bringing more moisture into the area. As we move into tonight, we have another system coming up from the North Pacific that's going to bring another round of rain, but we will have some diminishment in the rain overnight tonight for the Panhandle area. We will have some level of showers hanging around throughout much of the night, however, until we get that next system moving in, bringing a more consistent rain to the area. As we move up along the North Gulf Coast, we will continue to see rain along the area from Yakutat through Prince William Sound area, much of south central Alaska, as we have that lingering area of low pressure out over the mainland part of the state. That's going to allow for those showers to continue through much of the nighttime hours. However, we will expect some level of diminishment as from the afternoon thunderstorms that we'll see this evening. So we might see some of those thunderstorms lasting into the evening hours, but diminishing throughout the nighttime. Out along the Arctic coast, and we'll have that high pressure continuing to remain there, allowing for fog to develop along the Arctic coast, down much of the west coast of the state as well through St. Lawrence Island, and then out through much of the Bering Sea and Aleutian Islands as we continue to have another area of high pressure out over the western Aleutians. Then our low pressure that was out over the Alaska Peninsula slowly tracking to the east, but continuing to bring enough moisture to bring rain to the eastern Aleutian Islands, Alaska Peninsula, and 4 areas around Kodiak Island. For Friday, that low is going to once again slowly track off to the east, bringing continued rain to Kodiak Island, the Bristol Bay area, the Alaska Peninsula, and for the eastern Aleutian Islands, where we'll see some of the showers on the backside of that low coming into the area. Further to the west, high pressure is continuing to remain out over the western Aleutian Islands, allowing for fog development for the central and western Aleutian Islands, as well as much of the Bering Sea, extending up again towards the St. Matthew Island area. Out over mainland Alaska, we do have our low pressure system remaining in place that's allowing for enough instability for thunderstorms to develop, especially in those afternoon and evening hours. This is going to be primarily for the central and eastern locations of the interior, extending up to areas of the eastern parts of the Brooks Range, as well as we continue to have high pressure along the Arctic coastline, keeping a lot of the precipitation further to the south. Down in south central Alaska, we'll have some lingering showers as well due to the instability in the area, with high pressure trying to nose in to the central portions of the Gulf of Alaska, following behind our system that's pushing into the southern portions of the Panhandle. It's continuing to bring rain throughout the day on Friday for the Panhandle area, with lighter precipitation in areas further to the north, such as Yakutat. And then finally on Saturday, that high pressure has extended out over much of the southern portions of the Gulf of Alaska, but is still allowing for quite a bit of the precip out over the Panhandle area. A lot of shower activity going to be expected on Saturday for the Panhandle, all the way along the North Gulf Coast into south central Alaska as well. Continuing to see thunderstorm development in the trough of those low pressure systems out over mainland Alaska in the afternoon and evening hours for the eastern portions of the interior, through the central and northern interior as well, and also out by the western interior, extending down towards the McGrath area. Up along the Arctic coastline, however, high pressure continues to dominate the area, keeping that precipitation further to the south. Then finally, down in the southwestern portions of the state, we will continue to see shower activity. Our low finally weakening south of the Alaska Peninsula and slowly continuing to move to the east, but still bringing rain to the Kodiak Island area, Alaska Peninsula area. And then as we look out further to the west, we'll still have dominant high pressure out over the western Aleutian Islands, with more fog underneath the western Aleutians and by the central Aleutian Islands. Taking us into our Friday morning low temperatures, we will have the Aleutian Islands dropping into the lower 40s, 41 degrees for Adak, a little bit warmer as we get further to the east for Unalaska, 45 degrees, and 45 at St. Paul as well. Mid-40s for much of the Bristol Bay area, right around 50 degrees for areas around the YK Delta, a little bit cooler, getting down to 43 degrees for Macoriac, and maintaining that 40 degree mark as we move up the west coast towards Gamble. And then as we get into interior portions of the state, dropping down to the lower 50s for most locations, but up as we get north of the Brooks Range, temperatures dropping down to the lower 30s, with several places getting sub-freezing. And as we move down into south central Alaska, we'll have temperatures dropping down to the mid to upper 40s, with places like Valdez getting down to 47 degrees, as well as Glen Allen and Talkeetna, and dropping down to Kodiak Island, Kodiak City also getting down to 47 degrees. Right around 50 degrees will be expected for the lows all around the Panhandle area. As we move into Friday afternoon, temperatures getting back up into the mid to upper 50s for the Panhandle, a little bit warmer as we are in the more southern locations with that push of warm air from the south. South central Alaska, along the water, temperatures getting up into the mid to upper 50s, but as we get to more interior locations, we are going to see temperatures rising into the 60s, with Talkeetna getting up to 67 degrees. In the interior, even warmer as would be expected in this kind of afternoon highs in the summer, getting up into the 70s for many locations, 79 for Fort Yukon, warmest in the state on Friday afternoon. And as we get north of the Brooks Range, we are going to see temperatures getting up into the 40s until we get along the west coast, where temperatures will rise even more up into the 50s, and that's going to go down the west coast of the state until we get into the YK Delta area, where temperatures will get up into the 60s to lower 70s. Some places, however, along the water will stay in the upper 50s, such as Kipnik and Fort McCormick. Then down in the Bristol Bay area, we're going to see temperatures rising into the upper 50s to lower 60s, and then only up into the lower 50s for areas along the Alaska Peninsula, and into the lower 40s for the Aleutian Islands. For Saturday morning, we're going to see temperatures drop back down to the lower 40s for the Aleutians, mid 40s for the Bristol Bay area, upper 40s for much of the YK Delta area, in the 30s along the west coast. But as we get more into interior locations, dropping down to right around 50 degrees, into right around freezing for the Arctic coastline, mid 40s for the south central Alaska, and right around 50 for the Panhandle. Then as we get into Saturday afternoon highs, around 60 degrees for the Panhandle area, with the highest being in the interior portions of the state at 70 degrees for the interior.
And now, aviation weather around Alaska.
For aviation, we'll start off with a look at our flying weather for Friday morning. Out over the Bering Sea and Aleutian Islands, widespread IFR conditions are expected. That's going to clear up somewhat over southwest Alaska, where we'll have some lingering MVFR conditions. Then a mixture of MVFR and IFR as we move closer towards the Norton Sound area. Up along the Arctic coastline, also expecting some IFR conditions up there. Most of interior Alaska will be in VFR conditions with some occasional IFR, and then south central Alaska will be predominantly IFR, as well as in the Panhandle. As we move into Friday afternoon, a lot of the Panhandle is going to clear up with VFR conditions further to the north, getting progressively worse as we get further to the south, where IFR conditions are expected. MVFR conditions for much of south central Alaska with some isolated areas of IFR, and then in the interior, primarily VFR with isolated areas of MVFR, and MVFR along the Arctic coastline as well as much of the west coast of the state. As we get out over the Bering and Aleutians, however, we are expecting to see primarily IFR conditions. Moving into Saturday morning, going to continue to see IFR conditions for much of the Bering and Aleutian Islands, with some of those IFR conditions making their way into southwest Alaska and areas of south central to include the Alaska Range and Prince William Sound. IFR conditions also expected for the majority of the Panhandle. However, areas further to the north from Juneau north are going to see primarily VFR conditions. In the interior portion of the state, primarily VFR conditions are expected. However, right through the central areas and then down towards McGrath, we are expecting to see some MVFR conditions. And in the Brooks Range, primarily MVFR, dropping down to IFR as we get closer towards the Arctic coastline. Saturday afternoon, conditions along the Arctic coastline will be primarily MVFR, but some areas of IFR right along the water's edge. Down in the interior portion of the state, a mixture of VFR and MVFR conditions are expected, as well as down in south central Alaska. Down in the Panhandle, we are going to see primarily IFR conditions with some MVFR conditions in the northern locations. Then out over the Bering Sea, primarily IFR conditions, as well as for the Aleutian Islands and Alaska Peninsula. Taking a look through our passes, starting up north at AKwx Pass, VFR conditions are expected on Friday, as well as at Adigan Pass. Taking us down to the Alaska Range, Lake Clark and Merrill will both be IFR throughout the day Friday. Rainy Pass will start off MVFR, then drop down to IFR, as well as at Windy Pass. Isabel Pass will be the opposite, starting off IFR, improving to MVFR conditions in the afternoon. Mentasta Pass will start off IFR, improve all the way to VFR in the afternoon. Tenita Pass will stay down at IFR all day on Friday, and Portage will start off IFR, improving to marginal conditions in the afternoon. Chilkoot and White will both start off IFR, improve all the way to VFR Friday afternoon. For our freezing level, surface freezing line remains along the Arctic coastline with an 8,000 foot freezing level above that. Then another area of 8,000 feet in the southern portions of the state, coming quickly to 6,000 feet over areas of south central, and then an area of 4,000 feet over the Gulf of Alaska. For our icing, seen icing around south central Alaska above 8,000 feet, and then over southwest Alaska, Kodiak Island and the Alaska Peninsula also above 8,000 feet is expected there on Friday. For our jet stream, we'll look at some stronger winds, 60 to 80 knots out over the Alaska Panhandle area out of a south to southeasterly direction. out over south central around 70 knots out of an easterly direction, moving out over the Bering Sea as well, that's 70 knots, and then 50 knots out of a northwesterly direction out over the eastern Aleutian Islands, as well as out over the western Aleutians. Then along the northwestern portions of the state, we are going to see northeasterly winds around 70 knots up there. Dropping down to 9,000 feet, weaker winds from much of the northern portion of the state, an area of easterly winds around 25 knots for the southern portions of the interior, then getting up to a size 40 knots over southwest Alaska out of a northeasterly direction, moving out over 35 knots northeasterly direction out by the Pribilof Islands, and then a northerly component around 30 knots for the central Aleutians. Strongest winds, however, are going to be out over the Panhandle area. 45 to 50 knots are expected out of a southeasterly direction, strongest over the southern portions. Then down to 3,000 foot winds, we are looking at similar speeds out over the Panhandle area as low pressure just to the south of the Panhandle brings in those southeasterly winds, 40 to 50 knots for those southern locations of the Panhandle, dropping down as we get further to the north in the Panhandle area. Ridging out over the Gulf of Alaska is extending in some weaker winds out over southern portions of mainland Alaska, extending up into the interior as well. However, out over the Kotzebue Sound area, we are going to see northeasterly winds 30 to 35 knots. Northerly winds out over the southwestern portion of the state, 25 knots expected there. Northeasterly winds out over southeast Bering, around 25 knots. Then out over the central Aleutian Islands, we're seeing northerly winds up to as high as 35 knots. For our turbulence, two main areas of turbulence, one up by the western Brooks Range extending out over the Point Hope, Point Lay areas, and down by Shishmaref as well. Below 5,000 feet is expected. And then for those very southern areas of the Panhandle, we are expecting turbulence below 5,000 feet.
Hello, Zoomers. One thing that I love about stars is that no one person named them all. So some of the names are super weird. For example, Zubin al-Shamali and Zubin al-Janubi. If you look southish after 10 p.m. anytime this month, you'll see this tongue-twisting pair in Libra up and to the right of the fishhook of Scorpius. In Arabic, Zubin al-Shamali means the northern claw, while Zubin al-Janubi means the southern claw. About 3,000 years ago, they were the claws of the scorpion, but Julius Caesar was like, nah. They lopped them off and renamed them Libra the Scales to symbolize Roman justice. Before you ask, yeah, they can just do that. Names used to come from ancient Greek, Roman, or Arabic scholars, but eventually we began naming stars systematically, with the brightest star in a constellation getting Alpha, the second brightest getting Beta, and so on. Keep looking up.
If you've been watching this series, you know that NASA has scientists posted all over the world studying Earth's frozen regions. We've got people exploring ice sheets, glaciers, permafrost, sea ice, snow, and even ice on other planets. But even our top scientists need a little backup sometimes.
I'm a scientist!
Do you like going outside to do science?
Yeah,
Why?
because it's fun.
Yeah. What's your favorite part?
Frost tube.
Frost tube! Cool!
In this bonus episode of Cryosphere, we're following the micro-explorers that are helping NASA collect data from their own backyard.
Do you think it's going to be frozen?
Yeah.
Yes? Why?
Because it's very frozen!
Here's the idea. Students construct a frost tube that gets put into a hole in undisturbed and uncompacted soil. During the cold months, students will measure the depth at which water in the frost tube freezes, indicating that the surrounding soil has frozen. This is one of many citizen science projects facilitated by GLOBE, the Global Learning and Observations to Benefit the Environment program.
What's going on? What did you find out?
It's ice!
How far down is the ice? So is there still liquid in there?
It's a worldwide program that, so far, has collected over 130 million measurements from more than 10 million students in 113 countries.
Are you scientists?
Yeah.
These measurements are added to a massive worldwide database that's free and open to the public.
GLOBE connects my students with the rest of the world through science and looking at climate change and how it's impacting the future.
Globe teachers like Terry are transforming the way kids see science and how they'll respond to changes in their future environment.
So we see your happy face. Ah!
Actually, we were so impressed with the kids of John Fredson's school that we decided to show their work to the scientists in the original NASA Explorers Cryosphere series. And they had a couple things to say.
Oh my god, that's awesome.
Oh my god.
Do you like going outside to do science? Why? How far down is the ice?
That's awesome.
Wow, this is really, really cool.
Hey students from Miss Terry's class, I just got to see your video. I was so impressed that you guys were braving the conditions of the snow and all the crazy stuff to go and learn more about the permafrost and where the water layer is right outside your school. That looked incredible.
It is so exciting to see you guys and girls doing such great work as we watch our planet change over time.
Hey there, young scientists. Looks like you guys are doing some amazing things. Remember to keep warm and take notes, and also stay curious.
Oh my god, this is awesome. I love seeing the enthusiasm of these kids. They're outside, it's obviously really cold, but everyone is so excited to be out there making measurements for NASA. That's wicked cool.
Because you're so right, science is so fun, and I really hope that you'll continue believing in that. The best piece of advice I ever got was, whatever you do, do your best.
And from all of us here at the Jet Propulsion Laboratory, remember, dare mighty things.
So keep up the great work. Make sure that you're having fun no matter what. That's the key thing about pursuing a career in science. Make sure it's something that you love. And I'm really impressed. So hopefully we'll take the lessons you're learning and apply them when we explore our solar system.
And now, marine weather around Alaska.
For our marine section, we'll start off with a look at our ice edge. We still have some lingering ice over eastern portions of St. Lawrence Island area, and we do have diminishing ice all along the west coast north of Wales. And now we want to point out that in a lot of those areas with that melting ice, there will be quite a bit of movement with some of those smaller strips of ice in those lighter ice covered areas. Could be up to 15 miles in one day. And we do have confirmed of some diminishment or breaking down of the shore-fast ice that is in areas of AKwx further to the east along the Arctic coastline. Taking a look in southeast Alaska for Friday in the inside waters up north, we start with southerly winds around 10 knots. In the central areas, northwesterly winds 10 knots, picking up to as high as 20 knots out of a northerly direction in southern areas of the inside waters. Seas up to as high as 5 feet in the southern locations. Out over the eastern Gulf, we have northerly winds 10 to 20 knots, strongest to the south. And then further to the north, we have a westerly wind 10 knots expected in the northern portions of the Gulf. On Saturday, flow over the northern portions of the Gulf is going to become more southerly, around 15 knots, and switching to become more out of the west and 20 knots as we get into eastern portions of the Gulf. Seas as high as 8 feet in those eastern locations. In the inside waters, central and northern areas out of the south, 10 to 20 knots, highest in the north, and then becoming northwesterly, 15 knots for southern locations in the inside waters. Out over south central Alaska, starting out over the Gulf, southwesterly winds 10 to 15 knots are expected. Southeasterly winds 10 knots out of our Prince William Sound area. And then in the Cook Inlet area, southerly winds 15 to 20 knots and southeasterly winds west of the Barren Islands around 15 knots. Then on Saturday in the Cook Inlet area, light winds out of the south, 10 knots expected. Around the Barren Islands, easterly winds 15 to 20 knots. Then out over the remainder of the Gulf, somewhat of a southerly direction, 15 knots is expected with seas as high as 5 feet. And then in Prince William Sound, southwesterly winds 10 knots with 2 feet for seas. Friday for the Alaska Peninsula and Kodiak Island areas. Around Kodiak Island, some variable winds 10 to 15 knots are expected, becoming more predominantly southeasterly on the Pacific side of Kodiak Island. Then around the Alaska Peninsula, we have a easterly wind component for most locations, 15 to 20 knots, becoming more northerly in the Bristol Bay area, around 15 knots there. Seas as high as 7 feet on the Pacific side. Then on Saturday, flow out over the Bering out of a westerly direction, 15 knots by the Alaska Peninsula, becoming southerly 15 knots as we get into Bristol Bay area. On the Pacific side of the peninsula, winds primarily out of an easterly direction, 10 to 20 knots highest through Shelikof Strait. Let's move into the Aleutian chain on Friday. Most locations, northwesterly winds. 10 to 15 knots for the western Aleutian Islands, 15 to 20 knots for the central and eastern Aleutian Islands, with seas as high as 6 feet on the Pacific side. Then on Saturday, a little bit change of directions for some areas and a little bit weaker winds out over the central and eastern Aleutian Islands. Primarily a westerly direction, but some variable flow mixed in there. 10 to 15 knots is expected, and northwesterly winds 15 knots expected for the western Aleutian Islands. Along the west coast of the state, starting up in the Norton Sound area, westerly winds 15 knots for Friday. Then right along the coastline, 15 to 25 knots out of a northerly direction, strongest up by St. Lawrence Island area, weaker as we get by Nunavik Island. And then for St. Matthew and for the Pribilof Islands, northwesterly winds 10 knots. Seas up to as high as 6 feet, highest on the north side of St. Lawrence Island. Then on Saturday, continuing to see northerly winds for the most part through the area, 20 to 25 knots for northern locations, but as we get south of Nunavik Island, dropping down to 15 knots and becoming more westerly. Along the Arctic coastline, we have northerly winds to northeast winds, 10 to 15 knots, getting stronger as we get down the west coast of the state and becoming more northerly, 20 to 25 knots are expected. Then on Saturday, continuing to see those stronger winds, especially through the Bering Strait area, up to as high as 30 knots through this area, then dropping down quite a bit as we get north of Point Ley, down to 15 and eventually down to 5 to 10 knots out of the north along the Arctic coastline. As we move into the recap for tonight's weather, we'll start off over mainland Alaska with low pressure and the diminishment of showers throughout the area tonight. We will have those afternoon and evening thunderstorms for much of the interior locations, but that is going to drop off as we move into the nighttime hours. But showers should linger for most locations in the interior, eastern Brooks Range, and then down and through much of south central Alaska as well. With the high pressure out along the Arctic coastline, we are expecting fog to develop along the Arctic coast and much of the west coast, as well as the Bering Sea and central and western Aleutian Islands. Low pressure out by the Alaska Peninsula will bring more rain to the eastern Aleutians, Alaska Peninsula, Kodiak Island, and the Bristol Bay area through the night. Rain is expected all along the North Gulf Coast, with some rain also for the Panhandle area as another system approaches from the south. With Alaska Weather, I'm David Kramer.
These forecasts are for planning purposes only. Call 1-800-WX-BRIEF for a formal pre-flight briefing. Always file a flight plan before you go flying. The U.S. Coast Guard Auxiliary urges you to leave a float plan with a friend or the harbor master before you go boating.